all of the various witnesses that gave statements in this case with the physical evidence that I've described. Often we find that the accuracy and reliability of testimony can be corroborated or sometimes disputed or refuted through the examination of the physical evidence at the scene. And so I put significant weight in looking at and in comparing statements given by witnesses, including Officer Donald, to the scene itself. But there's other evidence in this case as well. I'm going to spend just a minute talking about that. We looked at the evidence from the scene, but as I indicated, we also looked at or reviewed the radio traffic that was recorded. That's been released some time ago and has been in the public domain for some time. But I've listened to that more times than I care to count, and have done specific timing of that and exacted some times from that as well. We also looked at the injuries that were inflicted as a result of the gunshots that Officer Donald fired. I know there has been earlier reports that that one or both of these subjects, Chaplin or Thompson, had been quote-unquote shot in the back. The evidence does not support that claim, at least the evidence that's been presented to me. There was clearly one round that struck Mr. Chaplin in the chest, and that bullet traveled through his torso and was actually located and removed, protruding from his back. It did not exit his torso, but it was found and removed from his back. There was a wound that was located on his back side, and some original descriptions from the scene indicated that it appeared to be 2 entry wounds, and just for proximity, it would be approximately in this area. When I reviewed the medical records, what I found is that doctors actually determined that that was one bullet wound, and the 2 injuries that were visible, what they call communicated, which means basically it was an entry and an exit wound. So a bullet entered Mr. Chaplin in that area in the back, proceeded a short distance and then exited out the back again, which to me indicates that when the shot was fired, he was actually turned to the side and he was not shot in the back, as the previous reports might have indicated. He also received an injury to his arm, which was a through-and-through bullet injury somewhere in the area of his elbow. And so those were the injuries. Mr. Thompson received 1 single gunshot wound to the abdomen, and it was clearly an entry wound from the front. The bullet did not exit. There was no corresponding exit wound. So in my view, there's no question that he was shot while facing the weapon that was firing on him. After examining all of this evidence and comparing it with Officer Donald's actually very detailed statement about the events that occurred that night, I'm convinced that the events of this night did occur substantially as he described. Now, nobody's memory is exactly perfect, and everybody perceives things a little differently. So certainly those are factors to consider. But I think an objective review of what he said combined or compared against the evidence of the scene demonstrates satisfactorily that in fact this did unfold substantially as he said. And in doing that, I also have compared that, as I said, to the radio traffic, where he's calling out contemporaneously things that are happening, which all seem to be consistent with his later statement, the injuries that were inflicted, and some of the testimony of the other witnesses, although there was only 2 other witnesses that claimed to have actually seen this or seen part of this happening. Many of the other witnesses who heard things gave statements that seemed consistent with an officer giving commands in between hearing shots fired. The other thing about this that I want to say is that right now there is really no reliable evidence to the contrary of what Mr. Donald has said. The statements given by both Mr. Thompson and Mr. Chaplin were short, abbreviated, and appeared to me to be incomplete and provided really very little detail about the events of that evening. I will say that as part of our review, we did reach back out to them through their lawyer. We were in direct contact with their lawyer and offered them the opportunity to provide a more complete statement if they wish to do that, and that offer was declined. And so at this point, my review is really limited to the evidence that I have, without speculation as to what Mr. Chaplin or Mr. Thompson might say if they had taken advantage of that opportunity. There's a note in my memorandum that also recognizes the fact that that is very much their constitutional right. I don't have the ability to compel them to give a statement in this regard, and I've not considered the fact that they didn't give a statement as evidence of their wrongdoing or guilt in any particular way. Lastly, there are statements given by Mr. Chaplin's and Mr. Thompson's sister, who I'll refer to as Jasmine, just to keep it easy to follow, and her roommate and or boyfriend, Antonio. I'm just going to use their first names to describe how I've looked at their testimony. Coincidentally, it appears to me, because they had no idea that these events were unfolding even by their own admission, but coincidentally they drove by this scene as a portion of it was happening. Now, they give some contradictory statements to each other about how they got there and the path that they took, and that's explained in a little bit more detail in my memo. But there is inconsistencies between the versions that they give that is noteworthy in my review of this case. But there are a few consistencies as well. For instance, both describe seeing an officer, an Olympia police officer, with a man at gunpoint who was wearing a white shirt. That would be consistent with even Officer Donald's description of having Mr. Thompson at gunpoint as Mr. Thompson was advancing on him. Antonio describes Mr. Thompson, or describes the man in the white shirt, I should say, as advancing on the officer. Jasmine describes the event as the officer advancing on the man in the white shirt. And so they are in conflict in that fact. And it is very clear, and they basically drove by this scene, stopped momentarily, and then proceeded on, and so it's clear they witnessed only a short segment of what was happening through this entire time. After looking at that, I do have serious concerns about the reliability of that testimony. Jasmine, by her admission, had been treated at the hospital and had received some medication and had been resting in the car. It's a possibility that that could have influenced her ability to observe or remember. I'm not concluding that necessarily. But I would say that there are concerns about the accuracy and reliability, although I am convinced that in fact they did drive by this scene as it was happening, and they did witness something of the events. At the end of the review, however, there's not enough evidence from those two witnesses alone to sufficiently contradict Officer Donald's statement enough where I could conclude that he wasn't justified in using deadly force in this case, or that he was somehow acting unlawfully.